All right, so I'll give you the disclaimer right off the bat. Be careful what you say because this is being recorded. So you don't talk nasty about anybody out there. You never know who's listening. Anyway, so we're going to talk about addendums, amendments, and counters. And this is the interesting thing about this is that the RPA makes up about probably 30% of what the entire contract is made up of. Because from the time you do the RPA on, that's where everything that happens that turns the contract, that changes the contract, that amends the contract, that counters the contract, whatever it has to be, those all become contractual items. And so we're kind of going to go through some of those addendums that are necessary for us to deal with on a regular basis, because that's really where your contract is put together, not just with the RPA. It takes more than an RPA to make a contract, and that is true. So we're going to start with these almost the way they appear on the RPA itself. So as you followed, if you happen to have an RPA sitting next to you or something, you can follow along on it, but you don't really have to. We can look at it here on the screen. But one of the first things that you come to right up at the near the very top, you have your name and you have your address and things on the RPA itself. There is a little checkbox there that says that this is a manufactured home. Okay, so the RPA is used for any type of a single family residence. It doesn't matter whether it's a manufactured home or whether it is a stick-built home or whether it's a condo or whatever it is. It is a residence. And if there's a manufactured home and you check that box, then it is going to automatically drop this down and add it to your contract, because we have to let people know that it's a manufactured home and it requires an addendum to identify that. Several different ways to do that. Type of manufactured home is what we're looking for initially, obviously after the address and things, but a manufactured home on leased or rented land, that is a manufactured home that you pay park rent on, that you don't own the land. You are assigned a space number in a specific park. That park has an address, but your individual manufactured home will probably just have a space number. So that is item number one. Item number two is a manufactured home to be sold with real property. And with is the key word there, because you are buying a manufactured home, but you are also buying the property. It's just that it has not been permanently affixed. It is going to be sold with the property, and it is on a foundation. However, the foundation is a temporary or movable foundation. And that is why it says with real property. You're selling the property and you're selling the manufactured home. But those items are separate. You have a parcel number. The parcel number is only going to apply to the land that has been assigned to the land. And your purchase price is allocated as follows. Now, this is a funny number. The reason I say it's funny is because it almost becomes a flip of the coin or a little guesswork or something like that, because you have a manufactured home that has some value and you have real property that has some value. And a lot of people will just put it down as 50-50. If you're selling something for $200,000, 100,000 of it goes to the home, 100,000 of it goes to the real property. Some people will actually look at what other empty lots sell for in those areas, and they'll put that down as the real property price. Some people will go to the trouble of looking at manufactured homes and finding out, just like a Kelly Blue Book on manufactured homes, what the value of that kind of mobile home is. The trouble is that neither of those items refer to all of the things that are done to the property. For instance, a manufactured home you bought for $100,000, but then you put a carport on it, and you put a garage on the property, and you have an RV dump station on the property, And you've added different things. Now you have a pop out or an add-on on the side that you decided to enclose your porch, and you've done things. So how do we know what the value of the manufactured home versus the real property is, which is why people will just do a 50-50 split, or maybe a 60-40 split or something, depending on condition and things like that. Real property, the same type of thing. Real property, if you just have an empty piece of land somewhere, that might have a dollar amount on it. Maybe it's $100,000, but somebody improved it enough to put a manufactured home on it. So now that real property has maybe a septic tank, maybe it has a well, maybe it has, well, who knows what it has, but it has additions that have increased the value of it as real property. And so that number, that's why I say sometimes it's just a coin flip as to the value. And there's almost no way to identify that entirely. The last one, B, is a real property manufactured home. Now, this one's to be sold with real property. This one is a real property manufactured home, which means that the manufactured home, through permits from the county and the city and everybody that was involved in it, put it on a, what we refer to as a 433 FHA permanent foundation. And when it's on a permanent foundation, that's what the identifying things of these safety codes are. A building permit is obtained, and a certificate of occupancy is issued by local authorities. All of those things happen to make it a, for all intents and purposes, immovable. And so it's not something that can be removed. So why is that important? Well, it's important for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that once it's on a permanent foundation, it becomes financeable at regular mortgage rates instead of at manufactured home mortgage rates, which are significantly different, because when you do manufactured home to be sold with real property, there's a value in the real property. The manufactured home depreciates in value, and so that changes that price as you go along. It also was, it's more of a security thing to the bank if they know you're on a permanent foundation, because then you can't pull it away and move it very easily. So they don't have an issue with a potential foreclosure. Obviously, we all know that they can still be moved, just like a house can be moved, but it certainly takes a lot more time, a lot more money, and certainly a lot more effort. So additional description: manufacturer's name and model and date of manufacture. And I highlighted that and put this date in because that is absolutely a critical date in the manufacture of a mobile home. That date, all of the rules changed in manufacturing. They went from 2x3 exterior wall construction to 2x4 exterior wall construction. They went from the dual wire electric system, which didn't require grounding, to the regular tri wire that we use now, or that's used in them now. Obviously, the things that does, if you didn't have a ground, you couldn't have a microwave. And there's a lot of things that you couldn't have because it wouldn't support it. So as of June 15th, those things had to be done. Also, by putting 2x4 walls on the exterior and on the interior, it strengthened the homes enough to where they could put a pitch roof on it instead of the regular flat roofs that they used to put on it. So that pitch roof allows for water to run off and things just like it does on a regular stick-built home. And so the date of manufacture is a very important date. The bank will look at you funny if you go to them with a house. I just listed one the other day, and some friends of mine, and I know I don't do a lot of listing or anything right now, but I, they're friends, and I've sold them 2 other houses, and so I didn't want to mess with it, things. And so they came to me with somebody who wanted to sell a house, and So I dug out all the information on it. It was a manufactured home on its own land. Very nice. Went out and looked at it, and it's super nice. It's on a cul-de-sac, has lots of amenities. But when I looked it up with title company, the date of manufacture on it was May 20th of 1976. So basically we missed it by, less than a month. And that less than a month makes it more difficult to finance, for one. And it makes it impossible to finance with regular mortgage rates and things on it. People have to come in with more money down, and they're going to be paying a higher interest rate. They may still want it. I hope they do, because obviously I have it listed now and have for 4 or 5 days. So I want it to happen, but they do have some difficulties that they have to overcome. Date of first sale, that's a different number. It could have been manufactured in May, like mine was, and not actually sold. It may have been one that was sitting on a lot or whatever. And so that date of first sale is not the date to use. That's why I didn't highlight that. The date of manufacture is the critical date. It could have been manufactured in May, like mine was, and not sold until June or July or August. And so if they used the first sale date, I'd be good. But under the circumstances, I'm not. All right, the property is on property tax rolls. That means that the property has been attached. You pay your taxes just like you do property taxes, or you have in lieu. ILT is what you're going to read when you look at a title. LPT is what you'll see if it's on local property tax rolls, or ILT if it's in lieu of. And sales and use tax may apply at that. So if they're paying an annual registration, and then they're paying property tax on the property alone, and they're paying, just like you do your cars, to the DMV on the manufactured home, then price-wise, some people come out better that way because, and they've left it that way because of that. However, most of the time, people just like to have it all applied in one place and all done in one. Serial numbers, it's somewhere along the way, you are going to have some serial numbers. You're going to have, and it gives you a lot of options here. But if we have any one of these options, then the escrow company and the title company can find out all the information about the home. So if you have a decal number on it, if you have serial numbers are hiding some places sometimes. The HUD insignia label, that's usually right on the very front. And it'll be on, the reason you have like 3 of them on here is because it's actually on the front of each section of the manufactured home as it's put in place and built. So each one of them gets a separate label stamped on it at the time. They'll usually only be off by like 1. Like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. And if you happen to have an expando unit or some kind of a pop out, then it'll go on to another number. Anyway, but they all stay in the same sequence for the most part. But if we have any one of those, then we can find out the others. And so it's important to come up with some kind of a serial number. Check on the front corners of a manufactured home. Check on the back part as you would be pulling it down the street. Look at the back and see if there are decal numbers on there. Look sometimes inside next to the water heater to see what serial numbers are. There's also another place you can usually find them. However, it's kind of a pain in the tush to find them that way, and that is so wherever the water goes into the home when it's on its foundation. It's usually up underneath inside there. However, it doesn't give you much room to get that information out. Sometimes you have to go all the way under the mobile to get it, but hopefully one of these other numbers will come up so you don't have to mess around with that. Okay. We're not going to deal with assumptions at this time. They're not happening that often, for one thing, but anyway, allocation of costs. HCD fees for providing registration and title documents. We generally ask the seller to pay for those, and use tax charged at point of sale. That's going to be paid by a buyer because that's like a sales tax. So if those taxes are involved, usually the seller will pay this one and the buyer will pay that one. Okay. So let's look down here for a minute. If you have a manufactured home, there is a special manufactured home transfer disclosure statement. It has a few items on there that obviously only apply to manufactured homes. They don't apply to regular homes. So it's got its own manufactured home transfer disclosure statement that is part of the contract. Park conditions at closing. When you sell one of those, if you happen to be selling one of those that are in the park, then the park may have some conditions for closings. They try to keep their park upgraded, and if you have a 1972 manufactured home that's been in its current spot for a long time, probably some of the things within the park, some of the conditions within the park, some of the HOA things within the park are different than they were when the manufactured home was dropped on location. And so it is important that and you can see, since this is an amendment to the contract, this becomes part of the contract. That has to be done. Here it says on here, 5 days after delivery, they need to decide whether they want to cancel this agreement or not. So right now it's an agreement. You have to deliver those things to them within 5 days, and they have 5 days after delivery to decide whether they want it. We're not going to deal with seller assignments or subletting right now because it doesn't happen very often with a manufactured home, but it's certainly possible that you could put together an agreement and sometime during the course of everything want to assign it. But it says on here, seller it's default to sellers not assigning or subletting. And that's generally going to be a park thing anyway. They won't let you just buy one and then rent out 2 rooms and all that kind of stuff. So, and occupying a used manufactured home. And again, this is an amendment that gets downloaded when you check the box that says manufactured home. So it becomes part of the contract. And it says here, even though a manufactured home may be sold in its present physical condition, the Mobile Home Parks Act, Health and Safety Code prohibits the occupancy. So you can buy it, but you can't live in it unless the standards that they set forth by the park with regards to fuel, gas, water, electricity, all of these things, if they don't conform, then you can't live in the house. So it's kind of senseless to own one that's just going to sit there. So obviously finding out about all these things early is an important part of everything. You have the buyer sign it because you're making it part of your purchase addendum. And it goes off with your contract. FHA, VA, mandatory clause. Okay, this is when you're checking the box, I even wrote it up here so that we would all know. RPA page 1, 3E1. That's the paragraph and page and all that stuff. It's when you check the box that says that it's FHA loan or a VA loan, this again is going to be automatically downloaded. If you don't check either of those boxes, then it is defaulted to a conventional loan, or if you check the box above that that says cash, then it's cash. This is not needed in either of those cases. It is needed if it's FHA or VA. And basically what it says is that the purchaser does not have to pay more than this amount of money. Obviously, we're not dealing with a manufactured home here. But they don't have to pay more than this amount of money for the property. They have the option of proceeding with consummation of the contract without regard to the amount, but they don't have to pay more than that amount. So if they put an offer in of $650 and said that's the most we can pay, and the appraisal goes out and comes in, and somebody tries to counter it or anything with a higher amount, they don't have to pay anything different than what they put in this box. But the other thing is that basically it tells you that everybody agrees that there's nothing going on in this contract or in this agreement that is not in writing. And it says here, certification, the undersigned buyer, seller, and real estate agents or brokers hereby certify that the terms and condition of the sales contract are true to the best of their knowledge and belief, and that any other agreement entered into by these parties in connection with transaction is part of or attached to the agreement. So anything that we do with regards to this agreement is in writing, and it goes off to the escrow and the bank and whoever else is involved in it so that they know exactly what's going on. So it's a certification that basically says that you're not doing anything. You're not doing any funny money or anything. You're not passing stuff under the table. You're not giving up part of your commission. You're not doing gift letters from parents or anything else unless you have written up an amendment that says that that becomes part of the contract and everybody has agreed to it. So this is basically saying, it's keeping us honest. It's saying that you're not doing anything that you're not telling everybody about. Because if we're not doing something right, if we're giving money to somebody under the table or something like that to close a deal, the lender has the right to know that because they're basing their entire loan, their loan to value and their ratios and everything else on the dollar amounts that they see on the purchase agreement. So if we're doing anything else, or on the counter, if there is a counter. Okay. Contingency for sale of property. This is on RPA page 2L8. So, buyer's property contingency. This agreement is contingent upon one of these things. It's contingent upon the buyer entering into a contract for sale and closing escrow on buyer's property. All right, so that's one option. Option B is only entering into a contract for the sale of the property. Now, from a buyer's standpoint, if I'm representing a buyer, which I am because I'm writing a contract, right? I probably don't want to check this box because basically it says that if somebody made an offer on my property, then this would be removed as a contingency. And even if my deal fell through, I would still have to close once I've removed my contingencies. So I probably want to stay away from this one when I'm writing it for a buyer, and I certainly want to stay away from it if I'm representing a seller and somebody sends me one with that check. C, only the close of escrow of buyer's property, which is already in escrow with such and such company, escrow number such and such, and that the copy of the contract for sale of the buyer's property and contact information is attached or will be delivered within 2 days. All right, so that is saying that I'm already in escrow. That's my favorite one. If I have to do one of these, that's my favorite one. I don't want one that's just entering into a contract. I want one that's actually in escrow, has a close date, has an escrow number that I can call and double check. So anyway, so this identifies it a little further. This says buyer shall have 17 days after acceptance to enter into a contract. All right, so if I check one of these up here, if I check this one here that says entering into a contract, or if I leave this blank and entering into a contract, the sale of and close on, if you see that this refers up to 1A and 1B, so it's either this one or this one, that the buyer shall have 17 days to enter into a contract. And if it's earlier, that's good, but 17 days is the maximum. So that basically follows along with all of our other contingencies that are in the RPA itself that we covered last week. All of the contingencies with regards to inspections and investigations and receiving reports and all of those things. It falls within that, and loan approval and appraisal and all of those contingencies. It falls in line with all of those contingencies, which is 17 days. Buyers, okay, so listing and MLS status. And that's again, if one A or B apply. So I am listed, buyer signed a listing agreement. and will give me a copy within, or I will give them a copy within 3 days that shows that it's actually listed. It will be submitted to the MLS in a geographical area where buyer's property is located, or buyer property will not be submitted to the MLS where it's located. All right, so we have some of this that happens occasionally. It requires a little more phone calls and things like that. But what if the property they're selling is in Sedona, Arizona? Well, they're selling it with another agent. I don't have access to their MLS, but I still need to get together paperwork that shows evidence. And that's what this is saying, is that within 1 day, you need to show that this is done, even if it's out of the area. Regardless of where property is located, I need to know that information. Okay, close of escrow. So buyer has until the following time to close escrow on sale of buyer's property. This again is to protect the seller, or actually it protects both, okay? It protects the seller as far as their time goes, because somebody could drag this out for a really long time, couldn't they? I mean, couldn't the seller just, well, I still haven't found the property, so we need an extension. I still haven't found the property, we need an extension. I still haven't found the property, we need an extension. It can be drug out for a really long time. And the same thing from a buyer standpoint. If the buyer has to sell a property in order to happen, how many times could he drag that out, and what would the poor seller be doing? So you can see where this really has to be worked carefully and closely monitored to make sure that everything that's happening on any of the properties are taken care of. Let me back up one step further. As we go into status of sale of property, what if the sale of the property, so my buyer we wrote an agreement that was contingent upon the sale of their property. That's how they were going to have the money to buy the new one. And somebody wrote an offer on their property. Yay, I'm partway there. But that person has contingencies, not necessarily for the contingency of a sale, but they have contingencies for loan and appraisal and everything else. So here I am, we told everybody we got a signed offer. We're opening escrow with such and such. Here's the escrow company's name. Here's the escrow number. It's due to close on such and such a day. And 12, 13, 14, 15 days into the people that are buying my buyer's property fall apart because they can't get a loan, or the appraisal comes in too low, or there's too many things that pop up in the investigation and we can't come to any kind of agreement on those. So you can see that actually, and we call them in real estate, if you've been in real estate very long, we've referred to them as dominoes. And y'all know the little game of dominoes, not the one where you actually match numbers and all that, but the one where you stand them all up on end on a table, and then you push on one, and then they run the whole chain and knock all of them down and things. Well, that's why we refer to them as dominoes, because the first one has to happen in order for the others to happen. And that's kind of the same thing with this. So when we're dealing with the contingencies on more than one property, then obviously there's a lot more work involved, which is okay. We don't mind more work. We get paid okay. So that's fine. That's what we signed up for. But it does require additional attention. Okay, time to give notice. So seller shall have the right to invoke the notice of 7B, which is to remove the contingency unless you receive an offer. Or they have a delayed right to notify the buyer no earlier than 17 days after acceptance, which is the regular 17-day contingency removal. Or they will have no right to notify buyer. Seller shall not have the right to invoke the provisions during the entire term of the contract. Now here again, if I'm representing a buyer, that's a nice thing to have checked if somebody will accept that. I doubt they will. If I were an agent representing the seller, however, I want the immediate right after acceptance. I want to know right off the bat what's going on. And I want to know, I hate this one here, although some people try to sneak it in. which seller shall not have the right to invoke any of the paragraph 7 provisions for the entire length of the contract. So if I've got a 45-day contract and they still haven't sold their property, basically I'm just sitting and waiting. So I don't like any of that. Seller's right to cancel. So here's a list of the seller's rights to cancel. After first, but notice that every one of them, and it's kind of funny to me. This form came out, I don't know, a few years ago, notice to performs. And we're so worried about filling out a notice to perform, and I don't know why. It's not that, it doesn't change the contract. It doesn't do anything like that. It just says that you have a contingency due, and if you don't remove it, then we have the right to cancel the deal. It doesn't say if it doesn't happen, we're canceling. Consider this canceled. It's not talking about any of those things. It is just saying that we may have the right to it. And if you look at the cancellation of a contract, the first thing that it says on there after name and address and date and things like that is after having received a notice to perform. So even in the cancellation, it reverts back to the fact that they need to have a notice to perform. Every one of these items, notice to perform, notice to perform, notice to perform, notice to perform, every one of them has a notice to perform attached to it. So the notice to perform is absolutely critical to being able to do anything with this deal. If they fail to enter into a contract within the time specified, then I need to serve a notice to perform. If they fail to close escrow for sale on a property within the time specified, I need to do a notice to perform. If buyer fails to deliver escrow evidence, I send a notice to perform. After first giving buyer a notice to perform, they fail to deliver the listing as applicable, then I can move forward. If they fail to deliver evidence, so on and on and on, it's all, you have to follow those dates and times that are written into the contract. That's the thing that keeps it a contract. If you screw up on that part of thing, then you potentially have extended without knowing a contract or changed it entirely without even knowing it. So what's the buyer's right? Well, the buyer has the right to cancel if prior to removal of buyer's property contingencies in 1A, B, or C, those are the three we talked about are you in escrow and are you listed and those. Buyers unable to enter into a contract on their property within the time specified, or either party gives notice to the other to cancel the contract, or buyers unable to close escrow within the time specified. So basically, if any of those timed performance contingencies are not met, the seller has the right to cancel on any of these, the buyer has the right to cancel on these. All right. All right, basically, let's just cover this real quick. Time periods in the agreement for inspections, contingencies, covenants, close of escrow, and other obligations, excluding those in the addendum, shall begin as specified in the agreement or on the day after buyer delivers seller any of the following. So most people will check this box because there's no sense in starting your inspection periods on day one if you know that you still have to get into escrow and you still have to close on another house. And so they wait until there's actual escrow evidence on that property. And that's what generally gets checked. Doesn't have to be checked. You can stick by the time periods that are in the agreement, which is the 7 days and 17 days and all those kind of things. But a lot of people will check this box to make sure that that 17-day inspection period doesn't start until I know I have a property. And the buyer's deposit shall be delivered to escrow within, this is on the regular contract too, within 3 business days. And this can be after buyer delivers to seller any of the following: escrow evidence, buyer's election in writing to begin time periods, or buyer's removal of property contingency. So it's not necessarily within 3 days of acceptance. It's within 3 business days after they deliver one of these things that says we actually are going to have a deal. Okay, let's talk about this one. It's another addendum. It pops up every once in a while. I don't like it much. I'll tell you that right off the bat. But I guess it covers this if this is a needed thing. Seller's license to remain in possession. Okay, so we're closing in 30 days, but this is the one we refer to as the SIP. Okay, it's the seller in possession, but actually a seller license to remain in possession. So anyway, this is the one that if they're going to be in there for any length of time after close of escrow, then we need to have something in writing that shows that, not just an automatic, well, you know what, we're not out yet. Can we have some extra days or something? But in the MLS, sometimes it'll say possession 3 days after COE. That's 3 days after close of escrow or something, to give the seller a chance to move out after it's actually closed. If there's nothing in there that says anything, or if the house is vacant or whatever, then possession might be the very day that it closes escrow. And all those things are okay. It doesn't really matter. Seller sometimes, because of circumstances, needs extra time to get out. If they do, and it's not going to be for more than 29 days, and it's agreeable to everybody, then this is the form that you use. Seller is granted license to remain in possession for 15 calendar days after close of escrow, or such and such a date if you have that date. Seller has no right to remain in possession beyond this term and may be responsible for court-awarded damages. Court-awarded damages. And that's an important thing to know, because I've had people call me, which is okay. That's why I have a phone. But I've had people call me and say, you know what, Terry, everybody's supposed to be out of there by tomorrow, and they haven't really even started moving, or they've got a few things boxed up. What am I going to do? Well, obviously you follow all of the notice to performs and all that kind of stuff. But if your buyer doesn't want to lose the property and they still want to get into it, then maybe you fill out an SIP and give them a few extra days. Or maybe you extend the close of escrow, because you don't want to close escrow until you know you're going to get the house. I don't know which avenue you're going to use to get them out, but know right here that just like it says, they may be responsible for court awarded damages. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means I have to go to court. Now, it might be small claims court, it might be something else, but if I can't get people out by the time I had, and I'm already out of my house because I had this contingency that said that the buyer was, that I had to sell my house. And so they've already moved in, and I'm in a hotel, or I'm out under garbage bag on the street with all my possessions in a shopping cart, or whatever the situation happens to be. I may have some financial damages. I may be having to pay for a hotel room. I may be having to do meals. I may be having to pay to keep my stuff in storage. I may be, whoever, the moving company may have everything in a pod, but they can't bring it to me, and I get charged every day I keep the pod. I don't know what those numbers are. They're all different. Every one of these deals are going to be different in some way or another. But the point is that court awarded damages is the key, because it's not just up to us to say, okay, well, you know what, you weren't out in time, so you owe us $500 or whatever that number happens to be. If you have it in writing, excuse me, I felt that sneeze coming on for about the last 5 minutes. Anyway, So we've granted them a license to remain for an extra 15 days. Now, you know what? My loan starts on day 1 when it closes escrow. That's when I start having interest accrual and things. So compensation-wise, doesn't it make sense that I should at least get compensated for money that's going, even though it's not money out of my pocket? Excuse me. Must be allergic to training. I have to figure out something else to do in life. Anyway, but there are going to be some financial, there's going to be some financial compensation that is due if somebody's in there for a period of time. So you might take the payment that the new loan requires, $2,500 a month or whatever, and you might divide that by 30 days and figure out what that would be. And then you might have a $80 a day or $100 a day or $150 a day or whatever that number comes up to. And if everybody agrees to that, then the seller will deposit those funds with escrow. Well, how do they do that? Well, if you did this when you were supposed to and you did it on time, then you would have had this form filled out ahead of time, and escrow would know that out of their proceeds, they're supposed to hold $150 a day for 15 days or whatever that number happens to be. And they will hold that in escrow and then release those funds when it closes escrow. If you have something else, if there's payment required outside of escrow for some reason, then you deserve a charge on insufficient fund checks if that happens. Hopefully that wouldn't happen, but you never know. Maintenance of the property. The seller shall maintain the property, including pool, spa, lanes, all these things, just like if they were living there. And they may not make alterations to the property without consent of the buyer, who is now the owner, right? Delivery possession. Seller shall deliver property in the condition on the terms provided in the agreement. Now, what are the terms of the agreement? We've already talked about that. We talked about that last week. But basically, whatever you guys decide on there, here's the property. It's being sold as is, as of the day of acceptance, unless otherwise agreed in writing. The way we otherwise agree to it in writing is with repair requests and inspections and the other things that we're doing. So whatever is agreed to in the contract, that still has to be done. Those things still have to be in place by the time you go in there. Seller agrees to pay for the utilities. Well, that's fair, isn't it? Seller shall make property available to buyer for purposes to make agreed to repairs or to supply services or something else. Keys and other items. Seller shall provide the keys and other items necessary to access the property as required in the agreement, or at the end of the term of this license to remain. So if they have a license to remain, then it just acknowledges the fact that you get your keys then. You don't get your keys when escrow closed. Seller shall not assign or sublet any part of the property. That would be fun, wouldn't it? The seller in there stays an extra month. They get an agreement to stay an extra 29 days or something, and they rent out a room just to try to offset some of their expenses. Who knows what people think in this world? These things have been written because they've happened. They aren't written as hypotheticals. So these obviously have happened at one time or another. Insurance. A seller's personal property is not insured. Okay, so now I bought the house. We closed escrow a few days ago. You're going to stay for another 15 days. The house is covered by my homeowner's insurance. The contents that belong to me, the buyer, would be covered by homeowner's insurance. The contents that belong to the seller, who is still living in the house, is not going to be covered. And so they need to, if they're concerned, they need to get a separate policy that covers those kind of things. So I'll have a policy on the house, but the seller that I'm allowing to stay there needs to have renter's insurance or something for the time that they're going to be there. And they are kind of renting in a way, aren't they? It says back here that they're giving me a certain amount of money for a certain amount of time. And the waiver of breach shall not be construed as continuing waiver of a subsequent breach. Okay, so I said just a minute ago that if we don't stick by the timelines, if we don't stick to the guidelines as far as repairs and things go, then we have a breach. And a breach of contract, we're out of contract. And that shall, and any of those shall not be continuing, it should not be a continuing waiver for any other breach of contract. You breach the contract, there are ramifications right now. And anything else you do in the future, that'll be a different one. All right. If buyer or seller intend to extend this SIP beyond 29 days from close of escrow, buyer and seller are advised to consult with a local landlord attorney and as to whether a landlord-tenant relationship may have inadvertently been created. So if I let somebody stay beyond the 29 days and we don't have anything else written down, which would be a no-no on our part, we should have anything written down as an extension or anything else. But basically 30 days and more is now a tenant landlord situation instead of a buyer-seller situation. So then tenant landlord laws fall into place. All right. Representative Hasty, representative capacity disclosure. Okay, this is on page 3 and 5. And anytime we are dealing with a trust or an entity such as a corporation or anything, if we're dealing with a power of attorney, it's like, who am I to be able to sign this agreement? Am I the owner in place? Am I a successor trustee? Am I the signer as president of a corporation? Am I working as an estate because I was named as a conservator for probate and things? Whatever gives me the authority to act for this, owner being first authority, and then any of these others being afterwards, then I need to fill out this form. If I'm just an owner acting as an owner, then I don't need to fill out this form. But anytime, we have one yesterday that we filled out I had the lady bring in her trust because she has the property in a trust. So she is doing a lease.
You registered?
Yeah, did she give you the number I gave?
I know, but it hadn't done one in such a long time. It asked me to re-register it.
Oh, no, you shouldn't have to re-register. You should just be able to put it under Randy's broker ID and stuff, I think.
Well, I don't have a ID to get in, so what do they used to just do them?
Yeah, let me think about that for a minute. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No problem. Sorry.
No, that's okay. All right. Okay, forgot what I was saying. Okay, so if I'm the owner of the property and the property is in my name, then I don't need this. If I'm the owner of a trust and the trust owns the property, then I need this name. And I'm representing a trust, aren't I? Even if it's my own trust, I'm still representing the trust. I'm not representing myself because the title is going to show in the name of the trust. Or it's going to show in the name of a corporation or a limited liability company or whatever it is. If the guy or gal selling the property or buying a property is different than the way it's going to be written up, then I need to have a representation agreement. Okay, let's talk about counteroffers. These are easy, but they're easy to fill out, okay? But let me explain to you, okay? A counteroffer, and some people don't understand this, and you should. And that is a counteroffer is actually a no on the offer. You know, there are sellers out there that you go to with an offer and they say, oh yeah, we'll accept that offer. But, you know, because it came in with the right price or whatever, but we want this and we want that and we want this. Okay, so what this is really doing is saying no to the offer that was written. Does that make sense to you? You're saying no to that offer because you're trying to change it. So if other offers come in the meantime, they can accept them. They don't have to wait for you to decide whether you want a counter done or anything else. But if you want to counter things, if the seller wants to counter things, they can counter basically anything they want. They can counter time. You know, when do you want to close escrow? 30 days? No, we need 45. Terms. We want to do, we want you to pay $5,000 worth of closing costs. No, sorry, we're not going to pay any of your closing costs. Purchase price was $650. Well, you offered $625. We're going to counter at $640. Different affiliates. We would like to use our own escrow company. We would like to use a different title company. Whatever those situations are, we can, you know, we can counter out any of those. But what it's doing is it's rejecting their offer and changing it to incorporate some of these things. Now, the only thing you put in here are the things that you're actually countering. If you offered $650 and the seller's going to counter, it says, oh yeah, $650 is fine. Do not rewrite in here purchase price to be $650. Okay, that's already there. That is in place. And everything that you throw in there as an addition just kind of screws things up. So what we're doing here is we are changing the things that are important to our seller to change on this one. There's also a buyer counter offer that comes up next that gives that a chance. So you write the offer, you turn it in, and they send you back a signed offer with the little checkbox down at the bottom, about 3/4 of the way down page 15, that says subject to the following counter offer. And so it gets set back and it says exactly that. It says, yes, we agree to everything in the contract, subject to the items listed in the contract, in the seller's counter, which are these items. All right. The following documents are incorporated into this. All right. So I want an addendum, number 1, that says who knows what. Or I want this, okay, you accept another offer. I would like this to be held as a backup offer. So I check this backup offer space. And then I fill out a form that says backup offer. Seller license to remain. Okay, that becomes part of the contract. I want to remain as a seller. I want to remain in the property for 15 extra days. That form we just went over, you would fill out. Seller purchase or replacement property. I don't like this one much either. I like the sellers to know where they're going to move and what they're going to do, because I have seen them fall apart, and I've had them fall apart partway into it because the seller couldn't find a place to move to. And that doesn't do any good for my buyer. TOPA, this is tenant occupied. Okay, so I'm buying a property that has a tenant in it right now. Is the tenant going to remain in place? If he does, then I need a residential lease after sale. And if not, then obviously I know he's there till close, but he's going to be out in so many days. Intent to exchange. Some of you over the period of time will deal with some investors, and investors have a tax deferment advantage that's available to them if they are going to sell this property and buy a similar property. They get to just move the money straight across. It's called a 1031 exchange. They don't have to have the exchange property in place yet. The exchange property doesn't have to be identified for 45 days after close of escrow, and it has to be able to close within 180. See the seller not disclose the need for an SPR until the seller's counter offer is. No, I don't. Okay, so the question was asked about the SPRP, which is a seller purchase of replacement property, which sometimes is not disclosed until they send out a counteroffer. And you can't help that sometimes. I mean, you can on your side, if you're listing a property, you should have that identified in more than one place in your listing. There's a place in private remarks on your listing itself that the other agent has access to, that it should be listed. So, and certainly, if that's going to be the case, I would send it out. I would send it out with a signed copy of the, I would send it out with a signed copy of the contract, even prior to the subject to counteroffer, if that makes sense. So I would actually try to send it out before that. You need to know ahead of time. You should know in the private remarks if there's an issue, because the other agent hopefully will have identified that as a possible problem, or not problem, but at least a circumstance. And so it should be identified ahead of that, rather than getting the SPRP with the counter, if that makes sense. If you haven't gotten it by then certainly the SPRP is the time to send it out. But it's kind of funny because by the time you send that out, they've you would have to check this little box here on the counter to make sure that it became part of the contract, if that makes sense. So does that make sense, kind of? So you can send it out at that time. Just make sure that that addendum thing is checked that says that this is now part of the contract. They have to find a replacement property first. Okay, let's see. Oh, this one I love. People don't pay attention to this. Nobody knows. Okay, so I sent out a counteroffer, and you have, based on this up here, you have until 5 o'clock on the third day after the date of this counter. So everybody thinks that they have 3 days to think about this and all of that. Well, that is true. You do have 3 days. However, seller has the right to continue to offer the property for sale. Seller has the right to accept any other offer received prior to acceptance of this counteroffer. All right, so we put in an offer and it was counteroffered, and my people want to think about it for a few days, and then I get it signed on day 3 or day 2 or whatever it happens to be, and I send it back over, and the agent says, oh gosh, I'm sorry, we accepted another offer. And that is totally legal and entirely upsetting. But our buyer needs to understand, and that's why I highlighted it and underlined it in red, because the seller has to understand that we can send a counter over, but just understand that they have the right to accept any other offer received. So if we're dealing with a hot property that's got multiple offers on it, we may really want to think about how quickly we get this signed and back over to the other agent, or whether or not we want to even mess with the counter offer, or whether we're comfortable with the offer that we presented. We just need to think those through, because those definitely could impact us. And it would upset you, wouldn't it? If you went to the trouble of showing property, you finally found one they wanted, you got everything written out, you sent it over, they sent you back a counter offer, and while your buyer is thinking about it, another offer comes in and they accept that one instead because it was a little better than yours. And it does happen, and it will happen. And so just be on top of that. Watch for this little thing that I circled, because they can sign your counteroffer. However, it says down there, okay, so the seller is sending out this one. So the seller signs here, and then it goes back to the buyer and says, we'll accept your offer, or whatever it is. Unless it says, and here the buyer can say, subject to the attached buyer counteroffer. So we can counteroffer them back with something that they said. Maybe the purchase prices, maybe we're still negotiating purchase price. Maybe we're still negotiating move-in times. Maybe who knows what we're negotiating. But this little checkbox, it's big here on the screen. But on your RPA that's sitting in front of you on a smaller screen, or even in paper, or something that somebody sent to you in a phone text or something, this subject to becomes pretty little. So be sure you watch for that. And if you didn't check that and just sent back a counteroffer, you kind of haven't made it subject to a counteroffer, have you? It's right now, it's just, okay, well, we signed the offer, but if you didn't check that it was subject to an attached counter, then you're still fighting. All right, so here we are. We've seen a lot of these in recent years. When I say recent years, I mean the last 2 or 3. And that is multiple offers. Those are still happening. They're not happening on every property like they were a year ago or 2 years ago or something, but they are still happening. And it's not unlikely to get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 offers on a nice property at a reasonable price. And so if you've done a good job listing it and you've priced it right and things, you probably will be dealing with multiple counter offers. Anytime there is more than one offer on the table, if you are only going to accept one, if your seller is only going to accept one, even though there's 5 here, I'm only going to accept this one here. I like this one and it's good and it's what we wanted and it's the time we needed and things. We're just going to accept that and go forward. They don't have to do anything with the others. They don't have to counter everybody. They don't have to do any of that. They can. If they counter anybody, they can send any single person, they can send out a counter offer. If they are going to counter more than one, they have to send a seller multiple counter offer. Now, if you got 5 offers in and 3 of them are crappy, they're investors trying to steal something or something else, but the other 2 are, who knows, owner occupied, good credit, all of those things, and you only want to counter those 2 because there's you maybe want purchase price to be higher on this and you maybe want a little extra time to close on this one, whatever it is. They don't even have to be the same. Your terms can be, I want more, I would accept theirs if I got a little higher price, but I would accept this one if they would give me a little longer to stay in the house, or whatever the case may be. You can counter those. Does not have to be the same counter, doesn't have to come out to equal. You don't have to do a net sheet in your mind to come up with who's going to get exactly to the penny the same. They don't have to be any of those things, but you can counter offer just a couple. But if you counter offer more than one, then you have to supply one of these seller multiple counter offers. And this is just saying that, you know, all of the things that are the same that are within the agreement. Some of these things, same thing, they might have to be added or not. Seller is making multiple counter offers to offer prospective buyers on terms that may or may not be the same. Oh, I think I've heard that before. Let's get ahead of myself because I've read the contract so many times, I guess. And the multiple counter offer does not bind seller and buyer unless all of the following occur. And of course, it's going to be, they sign this, they sign that, everybody signs everything. And then we actually have an executed offer because everybody signed and accepted whatever the offers were. Expiration, here again, it says that it on such and such a day or the 3rd day after it was signed. But remember, I should have redlined this too. Seller has the right to continue to offer the property for sale. They have the right to accept any other offer received. Okay, so it kind of goes through the same thing. You can write more than one multiple counter offer. They don't have to be the same. It says that right up there. Everybody has their chance to accept or reject. Once it comes back in, everybody signs and poof, now we're in escrow. It's the buyer counter offer. We just talked about that a minute ago. The buyer can counter offer back by checking that little box on the seller counter offer, this little box down here, right here. Watch for this. Then they can turn around and send back a second counter offer, or they can counter your counter, so to speak. And I can tell you that sometimes this happens a lot. You get a lot of counter offers going back and forth, and keep it clean. That's why it's talking about that's why we talked about earlier, not going back and reiterating stuff that we already know and things. The more stuff you put in here, the more confused everybody's going to be by the time it's done. And at the end of it, you may have to recap everything. So if it only went back once or twice, you're probably okay. If it went back multiple times, then who knows? All right. So now we've got an agreement. We agreed on the counter, we opened escrow, everybody's happy. And now we found out something's different. What can be different? Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of different things. Okay, say for instance, the buyers were trying to get a loan and they found out that even though they thought they'd qualified and things, there was a little bit of an issue with their qualifying because their income isn't the same this year as it has been the last couple of years. Maybe their overtime got cut and the overtime is not guaranteed and things. So they need to get somebody else on there with them. So maybe they're going to add mom and dad to the contract to try to increase their, increase the income. And mom and dad are willing to get on there and co-sign and things. Maybe the appraisal was done and the purchase price came in $25,000 less than you had offered on the property. And so maybe we're going to try to get them to agree to drop the price. So you write in here, per appraisal dated blah, blah, blah. Purchase price to be reduced to $639 instead of the $650 or whatever that we had written in. So different things can be amended to the existing agreement terms. And this is amendment number 1. Things can be, reason here it says, reason here that it gives you a spot for a number is because sometimes there's more than one thing that happens during the course of things. Maybe one of those things popped up a week into the transaction. Well, we can still get these people in there, but we have to change loans. So it's no longer a conventional loan with 20% down. It's now an FHA loan with 3.5% down and Cal half a help or whatever it happens. Okay, so that changes the loan from the original purchase agreement that we had where we marked the little box or did not mark the little box regarding loans. So that could change. So there are things that can change during the course of an agreement. That's fine. We just need to make sure that everybody knows about it and everybody signs off on it. Because basically, if I'm changing loans, I may have a seller who says, oh, wait a minute, they must be in trouble on this loan. I don't think I want to continue with this contract. Well, that's a possibility that they want to go to another. Now they go back. Remember, you had that multiple counter offer that we talked about a minute ago. Now they decide they want to go back to that multiple counter offer and go to the other people and say, are you still interested? Who knows what they want to do? Usually people are okay working their way through these things as long as it doesn't change things significantly. If you wanted to add a name to it, sometimes they didn't spell the name right. It goes to the lender, the contract goes to the lender and you put in Harry Ryan. And the lender pulled all of my information everywhere, where I worked and credit reports and everything else. And it refers to everything as Terry Joe Ryan. But I put in my contract Terry Ryan and the lender wants everything to be the same. So I could go in there and put, buyer's name to be Terry Joe Ryan. And so you change that kind of thing. So it could be something as simple as name change to something as a loan change, maybe a lender change. We had one the other day that, and I'm sure we have these all the time, that one lender decided he couldn't do that kind of a loan anymore. But they found another person that would do that. And so when they found another person that would do that loan, then they wanted to change lenders, which is fine. Everything works. But are you still going to be able to close in the same amount of time? Or now do you need extra time because we're having to redo everything? These amendments can be a lot of different things. But the basic thing is if it changes terms of the agreement, it says right here, we are amending existing agreement terms. So it's actually changing the terms of the agreement in place. And everybody signs off of that and accepted, or amendment not accepted. And I give it to my seller, and my seller says, no, we're not doing that. So then it gets initialed here on such and such a date that they saw it, they would not accept the amendment, don't have them sign here and here. Once they sign here, they've accepted it. But if they sign here, it's not accepted, or initial here. All right, extension of time. These happen all the time, but people need to know about them. Scheduled escrow extended to, I was talking to Melody yesterday in the Hemet escrow office. And we were talking about the number that we were going to close for this month and things. And one of the things she said, well, and I asked her, I said, oh, well, I thought when we talked a few days ago that we thought we were going to hit this number. And she says, well, we're still going to close that number. However, we're not going to get them closed in May because the lender is not going to get escrow or not going to get loan docs out until this weekend. All right, so it's due to close tomorrow. And it's not going to, or it was due to close today, and it's not going to because we're just getting loan docs. And so we need an extension of escrow to actually extend that. Some people say, well, it's only a couple of days, it won't make any difference. It's only till Monday or something. Well, you know what? That might be true. That might be true that it doesn't make any difference in things, but wouldn't you feel better if you knew that you'd actually gotten a sign off on it and that people knew on it and that we weren't just hoping? Because literally, if they were on top of their notice to perform some things, they could, if it didn't close, they could service a notice to perform. We'd have 3 days to close and we wouldn't be able to get it done. And they could go take a higher offer that they kind of wanted to take anyway. Who knows what's going on in people's minds and on certain circumstances. But anyway, contingency times can be lengthened. We have 17 days to get our investigation of the property. We've had trouble getting a roofer over there because they're so busy because of the rains we've received. And we're trying to get a roof inspection on. So we would like an extra 5 days because he says he can get out there on Friday or whatever it happens to be. So as long as people know about it, you can extend those things. The loan, the same thing. We just talked about an amendment that changes the loan. So here's the loan contingency. We need an extra week or whatever it happens to be. Other extensions are just other extensions for things that have to be done during the course of time. Maybe there's termite work that was supposed to be done, but the termite people couldn't get out there in time. Maybe there's damage because of the termites they found after they were there. Maybe they're waiting for a well report to come back because they had to send off to Riverside County for a well inspection, and who knows what the situation is. This is just allowing us to change things if we need to. And remember on the RPA that we talked about last week and things, one of the things that refers to several times there is written. Okay, so this is how we written them. Writing it may work with a text message or an email. I can't promise that. How do you get a sign off on an email? I send it to the other agent. And how do I know that the other agent got it to the right people or anything? This is the way we get sign-offs on those things. Okay, this is the other one that kind of goes off the SIP, the seller in possession. So this one is when a buyer is asking for early occupancy. We're going to close escrow on the 6th, but I'd like to get in this weekend if I could, because it's the house is vacant anyway, whatever the case may be. Those things are up for negotiation. Buyer is granted possession for 5 calendar days before close of escrow, or whatever. So they can decide on the days. In consideration, they agree to pay early possession fee of how much per day. Buyer agrees to pay for all utilities and services. They will make property available to seller for purpose entering to make repairs. So you're moving in early, but I can't get termite work done until next Monday. So we still need access to the property, maybe maintenance or alterations, insurance. I like this right here. That's why I highlighted it. And it's also, I told you that I didn't like these forms much, the early occupancy or the seller to stay in possession. I don't like either of those forms very much. I like the forms, don't get me wrong. It's a form that protects us. I don't like the circumstance. I don't like a seller to stay in possession because when do I do my final verification? How do I know that they're gonna leave the house in the same shape it was when we did our VP? Who knows? The other thing is, it says here, sell, just like on the other one, seller is advised not to let buyer commence early occupancy until seller has both received and reviewed a copy of the buyer's insurance, consulted with seller's insurance advisor, and there are just too many things that can go wrong when somebody goes in there early. And so we give seller's advice. Here it says, brokers, and I highlighted this because of it, brokers do not recommend early occupancy. Okay, that's simple. That's us saying we don't advise that. You let somebody in there early and all of a sudden they start finding other things wrong with the house maybe, or maybe they created some problems and now they're going to push it back on the seller because they say they won't admit to the fact that they did it. Well, we know we moved in and then we found out that the stove doesn't work. Stove worked when we did our home inspection and it worked when you did your final walkthrough. So maybe you broke the stove. Now there's conversation going back and forth and it's never fun conversation. And guess who's right in the middle of it? Yes, you're right. Anybody that raised their hand, you are right. You're the one that's right in the middle of it. And pre-occupancy storage, this is almost as bad as this one. But it is another option, and that is as well, the house is vacant. How about if we just move stuff into the garage? How about if we just move some of our stuff into that storage shed that's in the back of the property? Can you do that? You know, it's not my property. If the seller and the buyer agree to these things, then yes, it can be done. It just needs to be in writing to protect each of them and to protect us. Because I don't want to make those kind of decisions. Buyer has granted license, that's the one buying the property, to store personal property as defined below. And then when you get down to the as defined below, here's the date. For how many days? Buyer shall move in on such and such a date or move stuff into storage on such and such a date. Termination, this license shall terminate on either cancellation or close of escrow, one of the two. If it closes escrow, then they're not preoccupying anymore, are they? Or pre-storing. In consideration, buyer agrees to pay this amount of money. Everybody agrees to that. Personal property means typical household furnishings and clothing, if not otherwise specified. Buyer shall provide seller a list of all items stored. I love that. That's why I like this agreement so much, is that so somebody's going to write down there and say that I have 3 blouses and 2 pair of shorts and I've got a couch and I've got a stereo and I've got, what does that list consist of? Well, according to this, personal property. So it's personal property, it needs to be listed. And they shall not store firearms or ammunition, illegal or flammable, hazardous, explosive, corrosive, caustic, or other dangerous materials. So I can't put my weapons or put all the cans of paint out of my other house or any of those kind of things. They can't be moved over there. And if buyer has not completed the purchase of the property, buyer shall remove personal property within 3 calendar days of the termination of this license. Or buyer may be responsible for court awarded. See, it says that again. This is like the 4th form that we've been over that talks about court awarded. So what does that mean to you? That means that you really don't have any hammers or levers or anything else that you can hold over somebody if somebody is not out of there in time. If they did not fulfill the terms of their agreement, then you're going to have an option to take it to arbitration or take it to court and see if somebody will say, you know what, you have damages here. You were supposed to do this. What was I supposed to do? Well, you were supposed to pay this much per day. Or you were supposed to do whatever. Here again, brokers do not recommend pre-occupancy storage. And see what they recommend. Same thing as on the other one. Consult an attorney. So you just tell them right off the bat to do that, because that's what we need to do. That's what the potential is. And that's what we don't want to have happening. All right, so all of those things that we just went over, plus the RPA, and not necessarily all of them on every case, but those are the things that make up a contract. And those are the things that escrow and that everybody is looking to have taken care of. Now, there's other parts of the RPA, if you remember the other day when we were covering, is that there are things that the seller has to provide the buyer all the disclosures. And they have 7 days to accomplish that. And then the buyer has 17 days to review those and to get all their inspections ordered and things. So those do not have to be on a separate amendment or addendum or anything, because they are in the original RPA. So those things are all covered then. They take care of you throughout the process. Those disclosures all become part of the process, all become part of the contract. And so hence your 16-page RPA is added to about twice that many more pages to make about a 35-page contract. So every one of those amendments and counters and everything else become part of your contract. So that being said, I am going to put you back on video for a minute and see if there are any questions before I stop sharing and start working on other things. Everybody good? Bill, you probably know as much as I do on this stuff. Joanna, you're okay. Sergio, Alex, everybody's good. All right, I'm going to leave you then. See, I think we have, I don't know, check your calendar. It changes all the time anyway. I'll have to check mine too. But I think that I want to say that maybe Monday afternoon we have another contract training class. Not sure where I'm supposed to be at the time, but I'll look at my latest update and see where they have me posted next. But anyway, we'll see you soon. Call if you have questions or thoughts, and we'll go from there. Joanna, are you there where you can hear?
Yes, I'm here.
How's your Menifee listing going?
We've been having a lot of traffic come in, open house. We got several families come in, but it seems like who are coming in are very active seniors. Some of them are actually still working, so some of them need like a third bedroom.
Oh, yeah.
So as you know, to use as an office. But I'll be having another open house this week. I still think the pricing is still very attracting. So we'll see what happens in this week.
Well, good. Yeah, you know what? In this last weekend, of course, I mean, I hate to make excuses over things, but you know what? This last weekend was a holiday weekend, and who knows where people were, you know, it's on Saturday or Sunday or whatever you did and things, but.
Yeah,
anyway,
I agree.
Yeah, if you've looked over the comps and you feel like those comps are still valid and nothing's changed from when you started it and things like that, then just keep exposing it.
Okay, sure will. Thank you.
All right, call if you need anything.
I sure will. Thanks.
All right, bye, kiddo. All right, we will see you all soon. And for now, we'll go back to work.